welcome. That's it. University of Otago Fellows 2022. Let me introduce them to you. From the far end, Mozart Fellow Sean Donnelly, College of Education, Creative New Zealand, Writer-in-Residence, Children's Literature. Is that them all?
It's in some sort of
Something
order,
like that, yes.
all the words.
Yeah. Swapna Haddo, Francis Hodgkins Fellow, Surawat Songsatya, Carolyn Plummer, Fellow in Community Dance, Michael Parmenter. Welcome.
Thank you.
The University of Otago Fellowships have been in existence for over 50 years, some of them, and are a huge testament to the university's commitment to the creative process. And I'd like to quote to you from a passage that Charles Brash wrote in 1959, which actually also prefaces the front page of the University Fellows website. Charles Brash wrote, "Part of the university's proper business is to act as a nurse to the arts, more exactly to the imagination as it expresses itself in the arts and sciences. Imagination can flourish anywhere, but it should flourish as a matter of course in a university, for it is only through imaginative thinking that society grows, materially and intellectually." End of quote. Though the University of Otago believes that our writers, artists, composers, musicians and dancers have a vital role to play in the health and well-being of our community, not just the university community or the Dunedin community, but the wider community of New Zealand. We look to them to offer us visions we cannot make ourselves. We rely on their craft to generate experiences which will challenge us, entertain us, provoke and reassure us, and tell us who we are. No pressure. End of quote. So this forum today is an opportunity for us to hear about the fellows and their journeys as creative artists, and to learn how these wonderful people do their craft. It's not a show and tell. It's just a discussion about the process that they use to do what they do. So as I say, if you can't hear me, do just shout and we'll all speak up and slow down. And we will have time for questions and answers presently. So to start with, I'd just like to throw one question. Well, I'd like to ask each of the fellows to tell us briefly about their career path, their career to date, and their journey as an artist. So, just a general CV. Go.
You started on my end, are you?
Oh, well, I just looked at you. Sorry, Michael, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, my background is in contemporary dance. I began dancing here in Dunedin with the inestimable Shona Dunlop McTavish. She was my very first teacher. So coming back here has been like a return to origins in a certain sense. But to be very brief, I was a contemporary dance choreographer. I had my own company for a couple of decades. Of recent period, I sort of turned to academic work, doing a master's and working towards a doctorate in philosophy and dance. But coinciding with the period where I was doing some doctoral research in Paris, I started to explore French regional dances. I was attracted originally by the music because I'm always looking for music for my contemporary dance classes. And I came across this music from the Occitan region of France, the sort of central and southern area. And it was just exquisite dance music. It just got me going. And my students loved it. When I was in France, it suddenly occurred to me that, of course, this is dance music. What sort of dances do people do to this music? So I did a bit of research and went to a few festivals and discovered a movement called Balfolk, which is a revival of traditional European group dances, partner dances. And that has sort of shifted my focus into, well, I won't say shifted because I was already a tango dancer for 20 years, so I was involved in social dance of one sort or another. But I became very fascinated by the potential of this form of dance called Balfolk to be a negotiating place for different dance styles. So I think that's probably enough because I could go on, but there's four of us.
Sorowet.
Kia ora, hi. Thanks for being here on a Saturday, cloudy Saturday. My name is Sarawit, and I was born in Thailand, but spent most of my years growing up in Auckland. And I guess I didn't really have a formulated or preconceived career goals or what I would like to become. I mean, art was one of the only things that I've always been good at. So I actually did 4 years undergrad degrees in paintings, and that was in Auckland. And I found that paintings become quite restricted because you're constantly dealing with a flat surface. So for my master degree, I shifted away from paintings and spent 2 years developing skills to do with moving image. And now, currently, I usually present my work in a kind of video installation, combining both moving image and sculptural elements. Some of the works that I'm exploring right now during the fellowship is that I'm combining hand carving of Oamaru limestones with a new body of filmic work focusing on the Kotuku, which is the white heron nesting site out on the west coast of,
Lovely. Swapna.
Kia ora, hello everyone. And I guess my journey started when I was a kid, and my writing journey basically started with books. It was a reading journey, really. I always found books to be an escape, and my mum used to use the public library as a babysitter, which is probably a form of neglect now I think about it, but it was great for me. And so my natural progression from reading was to write, and I used to submit articles to school newspaper, and then sort of lost my confidence in writing in my 20s. And then when I found out I was pregnant, I decided to make a book for my son. And I was working at an art studio at the time, and one of the artists there had just signed a book deal, saw the book I was working on during lunchtimes and said I should send it to her agent, which I did. And then her agent said, "This is trash." But it's sort of, I don't know, maybe I just don't like being told no. It just sort of sparked something in me to carry on writing. So I kept doing that for a couple of years, sending out work, getting rejected, and then eventually won the Greenhouse Funny Prize, which was run by a literary agency and had Faber and Faber on the judging panel, and they bought my first book in 2014. And since then, it's just been a bit of a whirlwind. I've been really lucky. I moved here a few years ago, and luckily my publishers didn't drop me. So it can be a fickle business, so I appreciate when there's some loyalty shown in this business. And I like to tell people that I have more books published now than I have fingers and toes.
Wow.
But that doesn't mean I'm missing like 5 toes. I have like more than 20 books out. And so, yes, so the residency here has been an extension of that and has given me some time to write a book that I've kind of had in the back of my mind for a while, but never been able to dive into because of contracts that are books that are due to publishers. So this gave me a chance to work on that passion project, which was brilliant, and hopefully we could talk about later. Yeah.
Lovely. Sean.
Yeah, okay. Well, so what was the original question? I've sort of lost the plot.
Your career, basically.
My career.
to date.
I guess my
The
career
journey
started
as a-
as a sort of a listener to music. I feel like I'm more of a listener in some ways than a composer. I'm a maker of musical accidents, and capitalising on those is what I enjoy and tend to do best. But probably started making my music career, although I'd been messing around with music since I was a teenager. Probably didn't start until my early 30s, which is kind of late for this. So, and what I make is a form of pop music, I suppose. That's sort of a weird cross between songwriting and electronic music, and there are tunes in there are lyrics, and there are weird other things. Basically, I've evolved from making music in my bedroom to coming out and making albums of music with people, and I think it's pop music, but it's a little bit on the brainy side at times, so it doesn't trouble the upper reaches of the charts in New Zealand anyway. But I'm still on the same. I feel like I'm on the same journey. I'm still about making weird little pop songs. That's the thing that interests me most, and being a sort of being a dilettante is my weakness, and I think also kind of my strength too, because you know I can always hear a little thing and try and incorporate it into what I do, and it's about play really. So, does that make any sense? Yeah,
That's lovely.
where
That's lovely.
I come from. Yeah.
Leading on from that, I'd like to ask you about the creative process and how you work. Now, where's your inspiration? What's your methodology to make something?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I think the best thing for me when I'm making music, and I've probably been doing it in the public sphere for more than 20 years now, is the more unconscious I can be about the process, the better really. The more I can be in beginner's mind, the more I can be in a situation where I'm excited about something or inspired, even if I really don't know what I'm doing. In fact, that lack of knowledge is a real boon, because it's I think the unconscious produces, again, it's that thing, interesting accidents, interesting mistakes, and part of my role as an artist is to be a listener to those things, and to be able to capitalise on them and extend those ideas as much as possible. So I'm always seeking inspiration. It doesn't have to be music. It can be a song, like a snatch of a song that I hear, or something that takes me back. It can be a painting, it can be a film, it can be a conversation, it can be a place. I find myself in situations where I'm suddenly inspired and I have to rush back home to try and noodle something out, to turn it into something, turn it into a song. So, yeah, it's capitalising on moments of being inspired by any given situation or any given work of art, and not necessarily knowing what I'm doing. That's the best thing for me, yeah.
I think I'm quite similar to Sean in that I can guarantee I'll have a brilliant idea when I'm supposed to be writing something entirely different and there's a deadline looming. And then I get really distracted. But I feel like my best work comes when I have that energy to go for it. So I try to, see that through before returning to whatever's on the desk. But yeah, I've been asked this before. I wish I could sit here and say, I get up every day and I sit down from so-and-so hour to so-and-so hour and I do this many words, but I very much have to have a lot of thinking time. So I think people don't think I'm doing much. When I'm napping, I'm thinking. but then what happens is a lot of percolation happens in my brain, and then I'll sit down and I'll just write, and the whole thing will come out quite quickly. And yeah, that's sort of my process. It's not a great process to have when you've got a
It's
few
a great
things.
process.
Is it?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's the only process. Yeah.
The only process, okay. So it's a good process, only sometimes these moments hit me at midnight, and that's not a great time to have to get out of bed and go and write. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't have a set routine, so to speak.
And do you have a notebook that you write ideas down in? Or is
I
it-
have many a notebook.
Okay,
I have
good,
a notebook, I have scraps of paper, I have my phone, and then trying to piece them all together and remember where things were
Yes,
is
yes,
quite
okay.
tricky.
Sorowit, what's your process, creative process? Do you have a routine, or does it
Just happen, or I mean the romantic sort of idea of the empty canvas.
process? Where do you start, or where does it come from?
Well, I haven't dealt with an empty canvas
No,
for a long
no.
time. I think because I have a multimedia practice, so a lot of the time I deal with a range of different mediums, and sometimes ideas come out from dealing with the process of tackling how to deal with that material. For example, you know, I would be like sanding limestone, and like the texture of the limestone itself would kind of inform, you know, other ideas. It could be something to do with graininess, the concept of time. You know, it's such an ancient material. And sometimes I draw back to, you know, my own cultural influences as well. Like there's a rich history of craft practices and different art forms back in Thailand, but also it's culturally rich here also. Like you know, trying to understand, to go back to limestone again, like to understand the complexity of place and the geopolitics that have to do with like where limestones are from, and connections that people have to places. Yeah, so a lot of the time, process, methodology, and ideas going back and forth between these two countries that I'm related to. So yeah, informed by Thailand, and both Thailand and Aotearoa.
My process for the fellowship is very different from what I normally do as a choreographer, because as a choreographer, I most of the time play. Movement is the material, so what often inaugurates my thinking is being in the studio moving. Nietzsche said something once. He said, "Never trust an idea you had while sitting down." So I figured if I had ideas while I was dancing, I was going for the better quality ideas. And that's basically what I do most of the time, is I'm thinking about things and I'm dancing, and those two things rub up against each other to produce movement ideas. But the fellowship is very different from that process here, except that this morning, as I was thinking about this session, I was in an Ebb Cafe just sort of jotting down a few things, and I had an epiphany. And I realized what my fellowship's all about, finally now that I'm in the last month. Yeah, because I came here with this idea that I was going to introduce Bal folk, which is a sort of a European revival of traditional dances. But I came into a community that is just full of dance that's already there. I wasn't bringing anything new. And there was so much for me to explore. I just made a little note of some of the stuff I've been doing since I've been here. So I've been to a couple of Scottish ceilidhs. I've been learning Irish dance, flat-footing Shonos dance. I've been having regular salsa and bachata classes. I've been dancing tango for 20 years. I'm now, my wristband, I'm at a blues and swing festival this weekend. I go to American contra dance classes. I have privates in Brazilian forró. I went to a dance in Oamaru a few weeks ago, which was sequence dance, choreographed ballroom. Went to the Larnac Ball. A friend of mine here, we're doing explorations in Swedish Polska. I've been doing Regency dance, performing at Ulverston in the Jane Austen piece, and then off to the Regency Ball in Oamaru. So I realized that what I'm doing is I'm playing with dance forms here in an attempt to solve a problem that confronted me or confronts me all the time when I'm teaching, and that is, as a community, we've lost the use of dance as what unites a community. So in the past, until the early 20th century, there were communities that danced, communities that used dance as a way of uniting them to identifying, self-identifying. But now we live in something completely different, which is we live in dance communities. This weekend, I'm with the swing people. It's got nothing to do with Dunedin or that. It's all the swing people from New Zealand who've come, and some from overseas who've come together. There's a tango community. It's not the tango community in Dunedin. It's all the people in New Zealand who study tango. So all these dance forms have become isolated and quite separate. I was talking to a guy I was doing a salsa class with on Friday. He had no idea that there was a swing and blues festival on this weekend. In fact, he didn't even know that there was such a thing as blues dance. So all these communities have become little worlds unto themselves. And often some of these groups have arguments between themselves and divide into further little groups. So we live in a time now where dance is not expressing a united community, it's isolating us into mini communities. So that was sort of the problem that I confronted when I thought of applying for the fellowship. Because for me, dance is a way about, it's a method for imagining the sort of communities we might like to be. Not necessarily describing who we are, but doing a sketch pad for the sort of societies we might like to be. So I realized this morning that what I was playing with was all these different dance forms to see how we might be able to get people to interact and share things in these dance forms. That doesn't seem to be happening very much at the moment. I could say a whole lot more about that, but what I'm shifted from is dancing with my own body to now dancing or playing with lots of different dance forms and the people who dance them.
That's beautiful. What's blues dancing?
Come along the weekend. It is a very old dance form. It goes back to the turn of the 19th and 20th century. We think of the blues as the solo guy with the cranky guitar expressing his soul and that sort of thing. But most of the most popular blues artists at the time were people like Bessie Smith, who toured with dance orchestras. Blues was dance music. It was what people danced to, which then became Charleston and swing. And so it's the predecessor of all these later jazz-based forms. It's the proto-jazz dance.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you all now a question regarding your work and who you're actually doing it for yourself, for your public, for your audience, and does that actually affect your creative process? Go. Are you mindful of the end product, or is the end product just a byproduct of your creative process?
For me, it's, what's the word, paradoxical, I suppose. I mean, it's both at the same time, really. I mean, it doesn't turn out very well if I'm not really doing it for me and following exactly what I want to do. And my craziest notion, it's that, the little still small voice, that's the little voice you've got to listen to. That little thing of, what about that little thing that you don't see very often? Try that. And it's it has to tell me a few times before that I get the point. But I think that I'm always trying to please myself with what I do, but I'm always feeling like I'm part of a conversation. I don't know who's really listening at the other end, and hopefully somebody is listening, and even better if they're talking back in some sort of way. If I was really just doing it entirely for myself, it would be, I don't know, would have become weird and entirely unlistenable by now probably. But you always, I think, this is my idea. This is the thing I want to try. This is the thing I'm excited about. And there is probably, I'm going to say there's an element of compromise in it, where you're kind of going, now, how do I get that across? How do I get that? How do I sand away whatever rough edges are necessary to be sanded away, or modulate what I'm doing to the point where now that crazy little idea I had is something that other people can get and enjoy. So both at the same time is my short answer.
Yeah, I think it's quite similar for me. I think, and also I think it's changed over the course of my career. I think when I first started, I was writing for myself. And then what helped was that I have the same sense of humour as an 8-year-old. So there was a market for what I was producing. But I think some things became more apparent as I was continuing to write, that I have a platform now. And I think as a brown author, it became more important to me to make sure my books reflected a more diverse society. But particularly when I was growing up, there weren't any books with characters of colour in there. And I think in some ways that if kids read stories that are not reflective of their world, they start to think that their stories are not important or that they're invisible. And so I consciously make a decision now about who my characters are and making sure that I have a really diverse cast of characters. But I think it's equally important that when a kid goes into a bookshop and they see my ethnic name on the cover, that it's not sort of typecast, stereotypical brown issue books, that they see my name on the cover of a book with a panda on it means that they get sort of a permission to write whatever stories they want to write, you know, whether they're about brown people or whether they're about pigeons. So, I think more consciously now, but I think at the heart of it, I'm still writing for myself. Because the minute you put the expectations of your readers on you, it can be quite stifling to creativity. So, that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Sort of the same, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, are you working for yourself? Are you creating for yourself, or are you more? Are you equally aware of end viewer?
No, I usually just lock myself in the silo. No, I completely agree with both Sean and Swapna. It's a bit of both. Even though sometimes, you completely focus and probably spend a week just with you, like with your own work inside your studio, you're still informed by, conversation with friends. I mean, I don't think of audience a lot, but I don't think it's possible to make work just for yourself because you live in society, and whether you're aware of it or not, external ideas filter through you. But I kind of reflect on what Swapna just said as well. I kind of make work for myself in the sense that when I started off, I didn't really have a lot of examples of visual artists who share similar background as me, especially within New Zealand art history canon. So it was a bit of a challenge of what kind of message or context do I fit in, or do I share with the public, or who would be able to relate it to my history or my experience. I think of the audience in terms of both Pākehā and Maori, but also I guess more and more now recently I get asked by younger artists who probably have also have kind of coming from migrant background or grow up as a Asian New Zealand history and heritage, so yeah, I do kind of think of them in mind, but when you exhibit your work is free from you. So, and I like it that way because I like that kind of generosity that art gives to audience or the public, so that they can bring their own interpretation to it. Yeah.
So, Michael,
As a choreographer, I probably would have originally said I may work for myself. If I don't love it or love doing it, it's not worth doing because I'm the one that's doing it often. But now the question, sorry, doesn't make any sense at all, because I'm not making anything for myself. It's the people that I'm dancing with and the communities I've danced with, we are making dance for ourselves, for a community that we live in. So the idea of me I'm not making something. I'm part of a group we're creating things together. I'm just sort of a facilitator. Yeah. And I'm going away and I'm hoping all this stuff's going to keep on going. So I've got nothing to do with it. It's we are dancing together.
Wow. Gosh, that's been quite a shift then, hasn't it?
Well, it's been a shift for me,
but
I think the Carolyn Plummer Fellowship in Community Dance is always
going to
odd one out from that idea of the individual creator.
Wow. Good. The last 2 years has been quite challenging for all. How has lockdown and COVID affected you each in your practice, in your career, or your inspiration?
Well, I'll start this time seeing
Okay.
Sean's been
He's been
starting out. So,
But Sean always forgets the question.
I'll say it again.
As long as somebody reminds me when it gets to
Yeah,
point,
yeah.
it'll be fine.
I'll give you a prod.
so COVID and dance thrive on exactly the same thing: intimacy. And so what is celebrated in dance is problematic in COVID. So dance and COVID, to somehow, even though they share intimacy, they now don't work together because we've had to avoid contact. And I'm not just talking about physical contact, but when you're dancing with someone in a room, you are with them, you're in their presence. And COVID loves presence. And so I would suggest that dance has been drastically affected by COVID. And we are only now enjoying the period of being able to dance together without fear of dire consequences. But every cloud has a silver lining. For me personally, when we went into lockdown, I can't stop dancing. I have to be dancing. So I did a little project where I found a dance form that's always fascinated me, that is Appalachian flat-footing, a sort of predecessor of tap. And I got an old table and took off the legs and put it down in my living room. And so I had months and months of personal time where I didn't have to do anything but, stay at home, and started exploring this dance form. So yes, COVID has drastically affected dance. And what I'm doing trying to do in the fellowship at the moment isn't so perfectly timed now, because we need to contact again. So if there's any therapy that's needed for coming out of the COVID era, it's getting together and dancing, because it's been neglected.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I would say on a personal level, it didn't affect much my practice, in a sense that parts of my practice dealing with digital animation as well. So I developed a digital body of work where, I could comfortably sit in front of a computer for hours producing work. But in terms of a wider community, I think perhaps in terms of, I guess, yeah, I mean, even before COVID, artists, we are already, you know, quite, I guess in terms of funding or like, you know, how to support artists, it's already scarce, like before COVID. And it becomes, you know, one of the main questions of our role as artists, or visual artists. Like, how do we give back to society that's, you know, obviously suffering from various consequences of this pandemic, but then how do we keep, you know, being creative during this time? And I guess, as we all aware, a lot of focus and funding shift to, you know, healthcare system, which is very important, of course. But then it's, you know, there's other, I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you know, funding opportunities already very rare and small before COVID. And now, you know, as we going into recession or probably already in it, is very worrying for artists, and especially those who are still, you know, doing their undergrad degrees in universities. A lot of their learning process has been through like Zoom video learning, and it really took away a lot of physical experience of experimentation in your studio, dealing with materials that's, you know, sometimes you have to go outside and collect and gather. So yeah, I can't really speak for younger generations, but I mean, yeah, it's challenging. Yeah.
So your COVID journey, Swapna, how have you got on?
Yeah, I think actually lots of silver linings, weirdly. First of all, I like being quite solitary when I work, so this was perfect conditions. But also, children needed books, children needed an escape. And so there was sort of a mini boom over that period, as I know libraries were shut and bookshops were shut, but people adapted quickly, especially online services. And so you found that parents and teachers wanted books and wanted author visits, and so everything quickly adapted to the online world. And it actually meant I got to visit more schools than I ever would have, and visited schools in the UK and in America, as well as in New Zealand, doing virtual visits. And it gave teachers an hour off as I talked their faces off, and gave parents an opportunity to have a bit of a break from their kids because their heads were in a book. So, yeah, I found it was quite good for me and good for my work. I'd just moved, and I think this was going to be a test of whether publishers stuck with me, because they in the UK they quite like to have their authors on the ground with them doing events. And then when they saw that it could be easily adapted to the online world, they stuck with me. So I think it actually worked in my favour in a weird sort of way. Probably didn't need to have 5 million deaths to have my publisher stand by me, but you know, if we're looking for silver linings, there was one there. Yeah, I think the thing is, it just proved that kids, especially kids reading books, it's still important. People think that we've lost them to YouTube and to TikTok and all sorts of things, but we haven't. They needed books, they needed an escape, they still need stories. And I think the sort of 2 years in lockdown, or 3 years depending on the country, proved that. So if anything, I think, you know, the market's always hard anyway, and publishing is tricky to get into, but if anything, it proved that we still need books and stories.
That's very encouraging. Yeah. Sean?
And what was the question again?
You had
just
say
joking.
that.
Go
You
on.
had to say that.
I don't know. I'm at the risk of breaking up the party on this one. I found it to be quite a negative experience creatively. You know, it caused me a lot of anxiety when this pandemic rolled around. I think I've always been a sort of a fearful about such a thing occurring, and then it happened, and it's like, oh my God, you know. And I find that, I mean, for me and what I do, anxiety is not a good basis in which to be creative, even to get into the state where you really want to play. I think it's just, you know, watched a lot of TV, you know, I think that was my thing. Having said that, you know, living in basically feeling like we're in a very privileged position in New Zealand, like it's been oft, you know, remarked upon. You know, coming out of that first period of lockdown, having sort of not been creative, suddenly there's a massive boost of creative energy, and completed an album at the end of 2021. And then promptly we went into lockdown again, and more anxiety. And so I've only just, this album that I completed last year is only going to come out at the end of October. So very much a mixed blessing for me. I feel like the thing that I possibly gained from it is a sort of coming out of that period of not being creative and being quite anxious. There's sort of a seriousness about what I was doing and going, well, I really want to make this count. Which again is not always a good thing. Sometimes you want to. It is music we're talking about here, and it's pop music too. And sometimes the throwaway nature of it, the ephemeral nature of it is actually what makes it good. If it's too thought about, maybe it isn't so good. So I don't know. But definitely, I really discovered, probably not for the first time in my life, that being in the position of being anxious about what you're doing is not a good creative springboard. It's a stopper in the bottle, really. Okay. Yeah.
But during COVID worldwide and the lockdown, the arts were sort of lauded as an essential sort of ingredient for our mental and spiritual health as a society, sort of worldwide. Do you feel then or now that you have got a responsibility with that regard, since the arts and all its facets was finally sort of realised as a important part of our lives, took centre stage a little bit more? No?
Well, one of the things that came out of the COVID situation was the tentative balance or negotiation between individual freedom and community responsibility. And I think that's something we have to constantly renegotiate in terms of what sort of societies we want to live in. And as I mentioned before, I think choreography or choreography, but community dance is the very site of investigating that. You have dances where there's very tight structures and everybody does the same thing and it feels a bit totalitarian. And then you have a rave where everyone just does their own thing. And we have to find some balance between those. So one of the things I love about a lot of the Baal folk dances that I've been sharing is that they have simple structures that leave room for individual creativity and improvisation, but you also have certain responsibilities. You've got to meet up with that person there and you've got to do a do-si-do with that person there. So this is sort of a thinking tool for how we think about those questions of individual freedom and group responsibility in the future.
I'm just going to hop on that question.
On,
I think we can't underestimate how the last few years have affected children. Lots of them have missed out, like we've spoken before, on key moments in their educations, formals, trips, things like that, the key bonding moments as well. And there's like heightened anxiety as well, because kids have not only been isolated, but their social media world has just sort of stormed on ahead beyond anything that we can grasp. And I think it's really important when you're writing books for children to recognise that not only are these books an escape, but they may be the only sort of place they can solve problems like that or feel that they can have their lives reflected back to them. So I think I'm more conscious of that. Moving forward with my work, I'm not only just trying to produce books that are fun and take kids away for a bit, but also books that are thoughtful and, you know, help kids process some of the internal struggles they might be having.
Yeah, I reckon. I mean, we mentioned this earlier, but I mean, in my industry and the music industry, I think that music industry, in the area of making music and listening to music, I think that during the period of lockdown, whereas people might have been seeking out some novelty in terms of that what they were watching on screens or what they were reading or whatever, in the area of music, I think a lot of people were wanting to go back to things that felt safe and familiar musically. You know, there's a lot of going back and listening to older music, established artists, and anything that was new or potentially challenging was at odds with the experience of being in lockdown. So, just again, possibly, and I don't want to be I don't want to wax negative in that way, but a disadvantage for anybody who was making new music during that time was that people weren't necessarily looking. I mean, there's always exceptions, of course, but people weren't necessarily looking for new music. They wanted things that made them feel safe and familiar and took them back to a time when they weren't locked in their house. So, yeah.
I'd like to ask you all one simple question: is when is any individual work that you are creating, when is it complete? Do you know when it's finished? Do you know how to stop?
I feel like it's never complete. I could tinker with things forever, but usually there's a quite physical point at which it has to be complete, and that's a deadline.
Deadlines and editors.
Yes, and also wanting to be paid my next advance.
Good inspiration.
Yes, that usually, I mean, essentially when you write a story, this magical thing happens with, it goes out and it becomes something completely different to someone else. And then it becomes something completely different to another reader and another reader. And you just have to let it go at the end of the day. So as much tinkering as you want, no one will ever interpret your work the way you think they will. So you just, usually a deadline is the point at which I have to stop and send it in.
Right, yeah. Do you know when you're finished at work?
No, not really. Sometimes I put something out and then I don't actually completely understand the work myself until years later. And sometimes you have to take that risk that eventually when you get older, that a better understanding will come to you rather than reach to conclusion first and then it's done. Here, you take it. It's sometimes I put things out, exhibit it, and hopefully audience complete those works. Or I don't have a conclusive intention. I mean, I have artistic agenda and all that, but I guess I'm very welcome for the completion to be done by someone else or in the future. And sometimes I produce work, a series of different exhibitions, even though the forms and the contents are completely different. I connect them through this kind of personal thread, through different subjects, and sometimes new work relying on works from 5 years ago to make sense. Personally, I don't know if that makes sense.
So as a dancer and or choreographer, when do you know that it's ready?
Well, I'm not here in the fellowship as a choreographer. So I'm going to say, well, the question, of course, doesn't apply to community dance because there's no end to it.
Okay.
So I'm going to spit against the wind and say, I know when something's finished when I say to the people in my class, yes, that's it. That's one moment. That one's done. Or a waltz turn is working beautifully. Yes, that's it. I'm out of here. You can do it. You take it away. So I know every time when it's finished because you've done it. You've got it right now. Now go and have fun with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, I think things just get locked off, don't they? I mean, you get to a point where you for some reason you can't continue. And certainly with writing songs, it's not always advisable to keep going forever. But I know for me, finishing something is just an opportunity for me to feel bad about it later. I really, really wish I hadn't done that bit, or gosh, that sounds indulgent or whatever. But there is sort of, if you look at more long term, there's a sort of a making piece with a finished, with a finished piece really. Yeah.
That's interesting because that's actually one of my questions here, which
sorry
you've
to
touched on.
preempt you.
So it's good that do you, in hindsight, look back at some of the works which you have released, which have been published or presented, and think, "Ooh, I would have done it differently now," or "I'm a bit embarrassed by that now." Is that part of the journey of an artist?
Well, just to continue on with my rant, I mean, I feel there's sort of a vague sense of embarrassment about, there's always a slight feeling of embarrassment. I mean, I went through a stage in my career where I did a couple of albums where I would go to cafes and my music would be playing, and I'd, the coffee just didn't taste as good, really. Or I just get it down and get out of there. But, I think there's a making piece as you go on. I think with any art, I'm sure it's the same with all of us except Michael. There's a sort of, or maybe it is. There's a sort of a platonic ideal of what you do, and it's kind of you've got this brilliant idea in your head, and sometimes it's very, very vague, and you really don't know. When you get there, you only know that you didn't nail it, and then it takes you another few years to realise exactly how you didn't nail it. So, but that's because writing songs, how many times do you ever listen to a song that you like? Maybe 10 times, 20 times. A song you really love, 100 times. I mean, that's how many times times ridiculously more than that. You have to listen to a song when you're in the process of creating it. Unless your process is to just something that's jazz or extemporizing or whatever it's part of you do, or you have a lo-fi aesthetic or whatever where you're just chucking it out and moving on to the next thing. But there's an element of perfectionism in what I do, which I really have to listen to things a lot, and I really probably do get kind of sick of them long before I'm finished. So
yeah, I think writing is a craft as much as an art. So the more you do, the better you get at it. And obviously, as I progress through my career, there are things that I perhaps am less proud of, maybe, or not proud and less proud of. Maybe I just feel like more recent works are more reflective of what I want to write. I think if you ever want to know which book I feel slightly embarrassed of, if that's the fair way to put it, is the one I'm not promoting. If I buried that in the shelves, then that's probably the one. I always look back and think, I could have done this better. But I think that's there's a perfectionist side, that you just kind of do that. And so for me, it's just easier to move on and not keep looking back at the last book, just keep moving on.
It can be a little indulgent, can't it, to sort of go back and internally recoil too much. You've got to go, that's done.
Yeah.
There's an expression in the classes that we're doing at the moment that's become a little bit of a standing joke, because somebody once, I can't remember the context. Anyway, the point of what I'm saying is that this perfectionism is nicely countered by child psychologist Donald Winnicott, who was after Freud, and Freud had made a lot of mothers very anxious because he put all the problems of child raising on their bad the bad upbringing of the parent, the bad parenting of the parents, and a lot of mothers were feeling very traumatized by the role of motherhood. And Donald Winnicott came along and introduced this idea of a mother doesn't have to be perfect; she just has to be good enough. So now when we're doing little turns or something in class, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough to get through and get to the next movement. And I think it's a nice counter to this. Oh, there was something wrong with that. You know, it's just got to be good enough.
Yeah, I used to get embarrassed about past works, but I guess I'm sure all of us, look back when we at our teenage selves and there's embarrassing moments. But I mean, your work is your history. It's even though there's embarrassing work, shameful work. It's your life records in a way.
With the work that you create, whatever format it might be in or what discipline it is, there's a sort of a letting go of it, which we've sort of touched on. But a book will last forever. A piece of music is ephemeral.
Dance is now and then it's not there anymore. Your works of art might be sold, they're not yours anymore. Is that a painful exercise in actually giving your baby away? Letting go forever?
I mean,
Got to give their baby away. Got to get rid of it, adopt it out. Who will take it?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, for me, sometimes it's to share.
Yes.
It's I guess visual arts in a sense is a different forms of knowledge production. It's a cultural production that meant to be shared, and it keeps history moving forward or going. But I mean, sometimes, when you're dealing with organic material, things meant to go away, and that's deterioration. That's fine.
Yeah, I think my process of giving my work away starts earlier than before it hits the public, because I have to give away to my editor or to the illustrator. So it's gotten easier over time to take feedback on that.
Right.
But yeah, I think in the first instance, probably with my first book, I probably found that quite hard to let someone else get their hands on it and interpret it in the way that I hadn't perhaps intended. But yes, the intention is that my books will go out and that kids will read them. So I am happy for them to go.
Right. Yeah. The University of Otago Fellowships, I think they all state that it's actually not compulsory that you actually create anything specific. You don't have to deliver a body of work when you're finished as before you leave. Is that a freedom or an impediment?
I think if I hadn't produced something, I'd feel very strange taking the money. Yes, when I first arrived, I had Jane and Sylvia at the College of Education who were really kind and said, you've got freedom, you can do what you want, and there's no pressure. And that was freeing in some ways. But I had a personal pressure on my shoulders that I wasn't going to walk away from here without doing anything and just pocket the money. That would have been really odd. And I'm glad, because that pressure meant that I produced something that I'm actually really proud of, and I'm really glad I now have that out of my brain and now have space to create other things.
Yeah.
I guess you did have to.
Well, I did have to do things, but I've actually ended up doing so much more than I thought. Like we have a monthly mini bale at the foyer at Toitu, and that was just meant to be. Well, it wasn't meant to be. It was just something that happened. It wasn't part of my proposal at all, and there's quite a few things that weren't in my proposal that have eventuated. But at the last bale on the previous Sunday, the director of events there asked us if we would consider keeping the bowls going on past the time for the fellowship. So for me, that's thrilling.
Yes.
Yeah. When something that's meant to have an end life, someone else is prepared to adopt it and take it on and pay the musicians and everything that needs to be done.
Yeah, great. Yeah. What would your year have looked like if you had not had this fellowship?
would have been a pretty scary year for me, I think.
Yeah.
You know, haven't had any music out for a while. There's nothing particularly on the horizon. It would have been that. I mean, part of surviving as a musician or as a composer in New Zealand is doing a lot of things that aren't entirely in your hands, aren't entirely, you know, they're curated by, you know, filmmakers or advertising agencies or whatever, you know, maybe it's production or something like that for somebody else's music. So, no, it literally couldn't have come along at a better time for me. And yeah, I mean, to answer that last question a little bit, it's a tremendous freedom. I think it's tremendous freedom to be given, but it's a freedom that takes a moment or two to acclimatise to as well. It's you're used to, you know, a sort of a kind of a conditional freedom, and you know, with the fact that, well, I'll get the chance to do this within these parameters, but then I've got to look to make some money somehow or survive, or maybe I won't eat for a while, my family won't eat for a while. I can't really get them to do that, unfortunately. But so it's a tremendous freedom, and I'm tremendously grateful. You know, I can't say how grateful I am for the opportunity, really.
Yeah, I think it came along at the right time for me as well. I was probably experiencing some level of burnout from the last few years with deadlines and quite intense publishing schedules, and I had an excuse now to say to publishers, can you just give me 6 months? And weirdly, I've been probably the most productive I've ever been in that 6 months. So as a result, also have produced beyond what I hoped to, and now have 4 book deals off the back of the work that I've produced, which is obviously, you know, financial stability for the future as well. So yeah, I am incredibly grateful as well that I had the opportunity to do this, and just a little bit sad it was a bit short. I wish it was a bit longer.
Yeah. So what would your year be like without the fellowship?
I think I would really be struggling, especially this year. It's been an incredibly busy year. I had 6 exhibitions already. So if I didn't get this opportunity, I think it came at the right time, because we as artists having a studio space, that's the most important thing. And as you know, that it's not easy to just hire a space these days, especially, you know, if you don't have parents who, you know, own a house here in this country. It's really, where to store your work or so it really did come at the right time. But I don't want to sugarcoat thing, you know. It's people don't understand. Sometimes people forget that artists, we don't clock hours like 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. And I mean, even getting this fellowship, I mean, we still don't get overtime or sick leave, you know, and this will continue after this fellowship. So even though it's an incredibly privileged opportunity, I'm still conscious of the precarious nature of my career, if I can call it career.
For me, I don't really think in terms of what my life would have been like without it, but in terms of the amazing things that have happened because of it. And particularly the people that I've met, the dancers I've collaborated with, the musicians I've been introduced to, the dance styles that I've never had time to explore before. I mean, I'm going to have to take a year to recover from the fellowship because it's just been so intense, and I've learned so much and made so many amazing connections with people that it's been an extraordinary opportunity in ways that I never foresaw.
That's beautiful. Do any of you? I know perhaps it's a little bit short, the fellowships, but there hasn't been any collaboration between any of you artistically, creatively?
I guess.
I have invited all my fellows to come to some of our bowls, but none of them have taken it up.
Well, I did intend to, but then got struck down with COVID.
Oh.
And
Yeah,
Sorowit and I
yeah.
had made plans to come along.
We were
as
talking
well.
about those provocative moments.
Yes.
But I don't think we've done any collaborations, but we went along to so Albert Bells, who's the playwright.
Yes,
Yeah.
who's not here.
He's
sorry,
not here
as
because
you can see.
he's busy actually working.
What,
So
you mean
Sorowit,
he has a proper job somewhere.
yeah, he's got a proper job. So Sorowit, Michael, and I went along to one of his readings, and I went along to Sorowit's opening of their exhibition here.
Yeah.
So it's been really wonderful to. This has been a good bunch of fellows. But yeah, no collaborations yet.
Well, not yet. Yeah.
Not yet.
Well,
yeah, there's
everything
time.
good. Yeah.
Life is long.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Sean's been dropping hints all afternoon. He's doing some choreography for a new music video for his music, and he's been saying, "Oh, I'm not really a choreographer."
Are you taking him up?
Oh no, I'm being facetious.
Just offloading.
I'd like to maybe now open to the floor. If there's anybody who would have a question for any of the fellows, please speak clearly. Oh, and Johnny's got a roving microphone for those that wish to, who have a question.
Sorry. I'm just wondering about the future of each of you fellows. What would you like to be like in, I won't say 10 years' time, 5 years? I just wondered about your future.
Well, obviously, when I grow up, I want to be Michael. But before that point, I guess I just want to keep writing. I just, it's as much as I whinge about writing, I really love it. I love the interaction I get from the readers. I think writing for children is an utter privilege. So I know that, you know, I've got a big responsibility, but I really love my job. So I just want to keep writing, and I want to keep having books that make kids happy and laugh and think. And
Good.
I guess that's what I want to do.
Good.
Yeah, I feel like it's always framed to me as doing exactly what I'm doing right now, but sort of bigger and better in some sort of way. You know, it's pretty hard to. I can't think that far ahead, so it's just sort of a vague smiling at the future and hoping it smiles back at me. Really, I mean that's what I you know, I want to write better music, and have more people get to hear it.
That's a scary question. I mean, yeah, considering the precarious nature of a lot of creative practitioners, especially thinking, you know, being aware of the state of the world, it's not very promising. But yeah, I would be very lucky if I could continue in the next 5 years, and hopefully, you know, there's more opportunity like this for other artists as well. That's not a very good answer at all. But
Precarious.
Well, I certainly want to be dancing in 20 years' time. And if I look back and saw a community of dancers that I'd help nurture to dance with, that would be especially joyful.
Anybody else got a question for our fellows?
Okay.
Covered the whole spectrum. Mm-hmm. Oh, I have a question from the back corner.
I'll ask one for you, Nicholas.
Kia ora, my name is Jessica Palmer. I'm the PBC of Humanities at Otago, so it's my lucky pleasure to host these fellows. I just wanted to pick up on the theme there about social accountability, social responsibility and creativity, and particularly because at university we talk a lot more these days about our research needing to be engaging with the community and being socially accountable and socially responsible. And you've covered that a wee bit too. I guess my question to you was, to what extent do you see that role in your work of being socially accountable or being involved in what it is to be community? To what extent does that damper creativity, or does it bring it alive?
In general,
I guess so, yeah.
yeah. Well, it depends what your community's doing when you give it to them. If they're rejecting it, if they're vomiting, I never fail but to be enriched by my smaller and wider community when it's a positive interaction, with fellow musicians, fellow artists or whatever, and reflecting the place that I live in terms of what I do. It's all positive. I sometimes feel in New Zealand we have our priorities with regard to the arts a little wrong. New Zealand seems to be a place that produces a ridiculous amount of great art and great writing and great music, and really punches, to use a sporting metaphor, how ironic, punches above its weight, when it comes to the arts. And maybe it's our way to just be a little bit, oh, that's good, and when's the next All Blacks, match? There's like a chip on my shoulder, but I don't really. But in terms of the arts, in terms of the wider community, I just feel like sometimes the artists are good and audience isn't always that great. Yeah. Do you think that's a fair comment, or? You guys are great, obviously.
I'm going to jump in at the other end of the table and the other end of the question, because and in this context, my past as a choreographer and the facilitator role I have now in community dance are exactly the same. I've always thought as a choreographer that I had to be creative in the middle of rush hour traffic. Making a dance is not like sitting at home working on your laptop or writing a poem or something like that. You're in the middle of a mass of people, and it's a time pressure, and you've got to make a decision now. And all of those pressures are just what creativity thrives on. So I think having a social consciousness or engaging socially, for me anyway, is the bread and butter of being creative.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Social accountability sometimes, there's very difficult tensions that you have to engage with. Particularly how I deal with, visual arts having a lot to do with representations, and sometimes I put work out there, for just to add into the conversations that perhaps is not very common, or maybe not exist, in terms of what is my role as an artist that is both that is neither Pākehā or Māori, and what is that conversation of being a tauiwi added to that conversation of New Zealand art history. So yeah, sometimes it can be a difficult tension to navigate, but it's also, it brings your work, it makes your work, I guess, alive and active within that dialogue of, producing new cultural knowledge.
Yeah, I think my work is led by society and themes, but I don't think it dampers in a way. It doesn't. I don't feel like it leads it completely. I don't feel obliged to follow what, say, society wants me to write. And if anything, I want to write books that do reflect diverse society. And if we take publishing as it currently is, it would probably encourage me to write slightly less diverse books. I don't think it dampers. If anything, it enhances it. Knowing that there's an audience out there that wants more diverse books to read.
I assume from time to time your creative wells will run dry. Do you have tools that you use to refresh them?
Yes, it's called Disney Plus. I recommend everybody gets that and watches it non-stop. I refill by engaging in other arts, so watching movies, reading books is a big one for me, going to art exhibitions, going to music concerts, dancing, everything. So that's how I create. I pull from that well that gets refilled on the daily, really.
For me, it's there's a sort of a tendency sometimes, if you're not making art, is to kind of force the issue a little bit, and that's generally not good. My time is best spent if I'm creating the situation in which art can flourish, i.e., building a better sandpit to play in. Reading more, listening more, perfecting my chops somehow, so that when the moment strikes, I'm ready to get the lightning in the bottle, so to speak. Yeah.
Sometimes I stay with it, let it simmer, and completely accepting that I need a pause, or the pause is important to the process to be able to continue. But then also, completely shift away from what you're dealing with, going outside, going for 4 days tramping. Yeah, that helps.
Whenever I get stuck, I just copy other people. I look around at what they've got that I haven't got, and I think, I want some of that. So I'll look at dancers on YouTube and copy them until I embody that movement, and then my vocabulary of movement is released, because I never copy in the same way, because I'm a different person. So I'm not taking their stuff, they're just provoking me into a new way of discovering what I do. So yeah, I go and copy people.
Good. This is being recorded. So those moments of emptiness, they're just part of the process. You've got to learn to live with them rather than be frightened by them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the journey. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, if there's any more questions from the floor, yes, we do have another one at the back.
I don't know that we've considered Dunedin in this university, yes, but Dunedin, any influences particularly over you in this year, or an impact of actually being in this city?
This place.
I can speak definitely to that, to the idea of.
There you go.
Sorry, did I?
No. There you go.
Just the geography of the place, really. I just end up walking everywhere, and I love it, and I find it very inspiring. The weird shape of the streets in this place, how they're streets for a while, and then they're sort of alleyways for a while, and they're steps, and they're streets again, still the same street,
Or not.
Like the weird way even a strip of grass can be a street in some places, and the houses all seem to fit together, but they're all different, and the shape of the hills, the way you can't go anywhere in a straight line unless you live in South Dunedin. You always have to go up and down a few times before you get there. I just find that tremendously inspiring as a place. So yeah.
Sean's from Auckland.
No, I agree with geography and geology, incredibly exciting, complicated, complex place. Just found out when I got here that the whole harbour is an ancient volcano. And then, yeah, incredibly diverse range of different kinds of rocks and history, like culturally, socially. Yeah,
Very
it's
rich.
very rich.
I don't think I ever really thought about it, but now I do. I've done the most amount of writing and I've had the most success with my writing having moved to Dunedin. So there's definitely something in the water, yeah.
And for me, certainly, I couldn't have experienced what I've experienced here in any other city in New Zealand of this fellowship. It's not that it's given me time just to spend in the studio, but it's been meeting with my own cultural heritage, my family from here, but also the cultural traditions of this place and the incredibly diverse range of dance communities that there are in Dunedin. It just astounded me, and I've made the most of it and engaged with them. So I couldn't have done what I've been doing anywhere else.
Lovely. Go Dunedin. It's now 2:30. I think we'll call it a day. Thank you all very much for coming. I would like to acknowledge Professor Jessica Palmer, PVC, and Jasmine Miller, who has organised this from the university end. I'd like to thank Johnny for looking after us here today. Thank you for coming, and I'd like to thank our wonderful fellows, Sean, Sarawat, Swapna and Michael, for their time and for sharing their journeys with us.
And thank you, Nicholas.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. And so the DPAG has afternoon tea out at this door, I think it's called, this door here. So you're very welcome to join us and talk with fellows more. Please don't leave. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.